Hey, I'm Brian, and welcome to a very different Vinyl Paints. This is not my normal cell painting content, because the final product isn't a cell painting, but rather goalie pads. But because of my reluctance to use digital, a lot of the concepting was done in cell painting, and I thought this might be a great look into my creative process, or what's left after years of anime, cartoons, energy drinks, and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. About 5 years ago, I embarked on a journey to have custom goalie pads made, and these were some of my earliest concepts. Yes, I'm bad at Photoshop, but it didn't really matter because unfortunately, I was told these designs were a no-go because I couldn't secure permission. So I began to sketch out a bunch of ideas, and I realized I had no idea how to translate my concepts into a format that they would be able to work with, specifically vector. So I enlisted the help of my good friend Dan to help translate my sketches into something that people might be able to understand. And they turned out absolutely fabulous. But 5 years later, they're starting to get run down, and I have an idea of turning them into either a jacket or a couch, so I thought I should retire them before they get too beat up. I still don't have enough subscribers to unlock chapters, so here's a card where you can see the different sections of the video. So why did I get custom gear with designs? Because it looks awesome. I'm not a professional, I'm a fairly average beer league goalie, but as someone who goes to conventions and regularly buys commissions, I enjoy art, specifically handmade craftsmanship. I see the beauty of goalie pads, the craftsmanship behind them, the cutting, the stitching, the effort, the design. To me, that's no different than someone who paints or draws. I was in the market for a new set of pads, and I look at the graphic work as the same as going to an expo and getting a commission from a local artist. No way of sugarcoating this. If you're buying new goalie gear, you are dropping some cash. And by some, I mean a lot. So for someone like me, this isn't one of those things I can do every year. It's been 5. And with work and other commitments, I always have to approach it with the mindset that these will be the last set of pads I buy. So my concept is go hard. Pretty much gather every single idea floating in my head, throw it at the wall, and then worry about trying to make it cohesive. A while ago, I painted the fusion of 2 cultures, and that was actually the inspiration behind my first set of goalie pads. And I decided to keep that going in this set, but this time I put a bit more of my personal likes into it. So what did my idea board look like? I was fairly sure I was going to keep Quetzalcotal and Llorona. These were 2 holdovers from my last design. Dan and I spent a long time getting them right the first time around, and I used the Quetzalcotal logo as kind of my logo all the time. The big change this time is I wanted Dino Riders. I didn't think I would get permission for Dino Riders, so Dan and I began to work on a T-Rex. I wanted to also incorporate elements from things that I enjoy. I saw this F-19 drawing in a book years ago, and I fell in love with it. As well as my favorite plane of all time is the Avro Arrow. I'm also into retro RTSs, so I wanted to have a little nod to the Command & Conquer series there, as well as Sting. I also wanted to include more references to places I visited, such as Banff, Drumheller, Toronto, Pyramid of the Sun, Mexico City, Opera House, Cathedral, trying to keep that fusion of 2 cultures in mind. So congratulations, I made a mess, but how do I begin to realize this? With a little help from my friends. This probably doesn't come as a big surprise, but I'm not overly comfortable working in digital. I don't use it enough to pay for a monthly subscription, so whenever I work digitally, I end up with really old limited software. I end up with jagged edges and less than polished works. Also, I'm a cell painter. Yes, there's overlap in the art, but it's crazy to think that I can do vector without a second set of eyes. As someone who's very comfortable cell painting, I'm less comfortable with vector art and graphic design, so I figured I'd ask Dan a few questions to better understand the vectoring process and get to know him a bit better, because he's a constant collaborator on this channel. Unfortunately, I only had one mic with me, so you won't hear me ask the questions. I'll just write them in before he answers.
So my name is Dan. I'm a graphic designer specializing in print and production, and I call myself Satabots. So working in vector is different than illustrating. Designing with vector is more about using shapes and color and how they interact with each other and how they would layer with each other, and keeping it simple. So when designing these pads, we began the process with sketch, inspirations, and the next step was to simplify those sketches to the shapes and the silhouettes of the elements, and how they would be recognizable in the most simple form. So some unique things about designing for the pads is thinking about how the layers of material interact with each other, and realizing that there's no outlines, so you have to use the stitching as design elements. The most difficult part of translating a sketch to a vector is taking the sketch to its most simple forms and keeping the essence in shape and color of what the original artist had in mind. So when converting an image to a vector, you have to think of it more of from color to color. So if, for example, Mario's head, maybe you would start with the red silhouette of his head, and then you would add layers on top of his eyebrows, his mustache, his skin, his eyes, then the nose, and essentially working from the front to the back. Favorite video game character, Samus. Favorite anime outside of Akira? Akira. Favorite Disney movie, Aladdin. Favorite animation outside of Disney, Iron Giant. Digital or analog? Analog. Favorite animated guilty pleasure would be the Zelda cartoon.
The design. The first thing I had to figure out was color. Flurry, Sport Gold, easy, that was a no-brainer. He brought color to goaltending and was so influential on me that I painted him on this channel. However, I knew I was going to need some colors for accents and other zones, and I bounced around between a few different palettes: a red-yellow Calgary Flames look, purple and yellow retro Kings look, and the last one, green, yellow, and red. The red, green, yellow gave me major Battle Cat vibes from He-Man, and I wish I had a better reason on why I decided on these colors, but I think that was it. So once I decided to go with Sport Gold, I laid it on top of Quetzalcotal, and on the other pad the T-Rex. I wanted to expand the silhouette that I had done in my previous glove and put it on the boot of the pad. So I did different country for each pad, focusing on Canadian landmarks on the T-Rex and Mexican monuments with Quetzalcoatl. But after deliberation and looking at it, I made an 11th hour decision. I guess I got cold feet and I walked away from it. And now I needed to revisit what I was going to use kind of as a background element. And I decided to use the design from the wings from the Avro Arrow as the new background from the pads, removing the cities. I'd been working on a fighter plane design for the glove, but I really liked the new monument silhouettes I'd done, and I didn't want to scrap that idea. I decided to condense the design and put it on the glove, which means my amazing ode to planes didn't really fit anymore. But I've worked so hard on converting them into an RTS style, I decided I would keep the F-19 and Avro Arrow. But then, tragedy struck. At this point, I had a couple of problems with my files. They weren't exactly the smoothest. I had mainly been using CS2 and Sketchbook and using freehand, so there was some rough edges, jagged edges, and lines that weren't quite straight. And unfortunately, Dan had gone on vacation to Japan, so I frantically called another friend, Mike, to help make some modifications to the T-Rex, as well as do a pass on my fighter jets. And this is what we ended up with. How to order custom goalie equipment. I don't know if any of the companies will deal with you directly, but there's a lot of places you can order from. I went with the Goalie Crease in Richmond Hill. 5 years ago, Rance walked me through the process, and this time Jason helped me out. There were a lot of questions that I didn't even know how to answer, and he was able to help me out. They also offer this amazing demo program that lets you try on the pads so that you can find out which pad's best for you. I knew I was going to go with the Bryans, that's the name of the company, not me, because I like their craftsmanship and the fact that it's local and bespoke. But I still used the program to try out a couple of Brian's pads to see which ones were working best for me. I tried out the Iconic and Optic line, My old pads were optics, but 5 years is a long time and they've completely overhauled them. And it's a good thing I did the demo program, because this time around, I felt more comfortable in the iconics. As a fairly average beer league goalie, there's a lot of knowledge I just don't have about custom pads. In fact, I've only done it twice. So even though I've probably done a lot more than a lot of people, when it comes to actually goal pads, I don't know if I ever played at a high enough level to know the difference between all the different options available to you. And I was really hoping to get Jason to do an interview to kind of explain some of that. Unfortunately, the timing didn't work out, and I'm going to just try to explain the process and some additional details as best as I can. But I really recommend you either call Jason or your local shop, because it really helps to have someone to walk you through the process. The first set of pads I had Rance walk me through, and this time Jason, and there's so many options and so many questions that you will be asked that it's nice to have someone to just be able to simplify it for you so you can make the right decision. I think the first question I had when I first started looking at getting custom goalie pads is, what can I do? And I think that really breaks down into two categories: color and graphic. The first one is simple, it's color. And that's pretty much, each brand has like a list of colors that they allow you to kind of mess around with and choose. Most of them have editors on their webpage that allow you to kind of place the colors into certain zones so you can kind of create your pad and your look inside their website. The second one is graphics. I'm more familiar with how Bauer and Brian's does that one. Bauer does like a vector file, and they pretty much have the ability to print that vector file onto a pad. I've been told it's very good, and pretty much whatever's in that vector file will end up on the pad. Brian's is a little bit different because they have a cut and stitch team, so they pretty much are taking your design, they take that, they interpret it, they cut it, and then they kind of stitch it all together on the pad. I know the next question I had was, how much is this going to cost me? And it kind of depends, it's a range. I can't speak for all the brands, I'm only going to speak about my experience with Brian's here. It depended on whether I just wanted a color to how crazy I wanted to go with the graphics. I think it's best that you contact the store to kind of get an idea, but I can tell you that it usually ranges between $200 to $900 depending on how crazy you want to go, but it's very palatable for the work that's required to make that happen. The next questions weren't questions I had, it was questions they had for me. Size, boot stiffness, the type of flex I want in the pad, the kind of strapping I want. When you get a custom pad, there are so many options that allow you to dial in your performance. Now, for me, most of the things they asked me, I had no idea how to answer. So this is where it probably would really help to go to a store, find someone who can kind of walk you through the process, because at least for me, most of the questions they were asking, I honestly had no experience with. And there's one last person involved in this process. Or maybe is it a team? I don't know. I heard the name Rio in passing, but that's the amazing team at Brian's. They took this concept that Dan and I created with Jason, and they ran with it. They made it a reality. The stitching, the fabrication, the customization, they're the visionaries who truly brought this to life. At the end of the day, when Dan and I left the concept, they're the ones who had to pick it up and make it a reality. And if it wasn't for them, none of this would have been possible. So thank you to the Brian's team for your amazing job. So yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a bit different than my normal videos. I thought it might be interesting as a one-off, but don't worry, we're back on track and we'll be back with some cell paintings shortly. I want to thank Dan and Jason for answering my questions, as well as helping me along this journey. Thanks for watching. I'm Brian, and this is Vinyl Paints.